Never made money. Never made money over paying the bills and just a general pocket change from the practice of law. I made my money in business.
There should be more attorneys like you.
Well, I don't know.
Attorneys have a bad reputation.
They do have a bad rep, and sometimes it's deserved. Not all the time, but sometimes it is.
Yeah. Do you think a politician's religious belief should play into their political philosophies?
Only if they want to practice demagoguery.
Okay.
Why
do you say that?
Because I think it's easy to manipulate people.
But that's a belief system. That's what they believe.
Right, and
you
can utilize the belief system to manipulate people into voting for you. And I think that that's completely wrong.
Okay. Now, how do you think the First Amendment should be understood?
In terms of religion or the press?
Religion.
The First Amendment gives a freedom to practice religion. Okay. It says that the state is not going to have a state religion. Do we really want to go to a founder's belief in terms of, if you want to take that argument that the founders said that there's going to be a freedom of state and religion, and that there was non-existence of a religion, I think that moves it too far. The founding fathers were, for the most part, deists and things like that, and so they kind of believed in a God, but they really were not overly conceptual as to what they were. Yeah, and if, I think it's pretty clear that they understood that there was a force, or they thought there was a force, because when they put together the Constitution, they said that this was being done because you had inalienable rights that were gifted to you by the power, God or whatever.
God.
So it realized that there were state and a supreme being of some sort. Whether they intended to have a complete severance of church and state as we interpret it is probably not necessarily the case. So it really becomes a question of whether you interpret the Constitution as a pragmatic modernism or whether you look at it as a somewhat frozen in time document. From
you're conservative. I also know you're.
Well, I'm more libertarian than conservative. I just think.
Yeah, but libertarians are very, very conservative to an extent.
To an extent, on the fiscal
side of it, sure.
Yeah, certainly, I think that the individual should be in control of self-destiny.
I know you're progressive to a point.
Yeah, on social issues.
Sure.
That's the logical outcome for me of that libertarian concept and freedom concept. If I'm, and that's the problem I probably have with the conservative movement is, okay, you want people to exercise their freedoms, but you don't want them to be free to choose whether or not to have an abortion. You don't want them to be free to choose a different religion other than what you see as the concept. And so you want to tell people what to do in the bedroom, but
well, that's
it really conflicts in terms of logic.
We're going to have some personal questions on life issues.
Go ahead.
Do you believe government-run health care will lead to maybe death panels for the elderly, the infirmed, as Margaret Sanger called human weeds?
That's an interesting concept. I think that probably it's a combination. I don't know whether we'll get to Soylent Green levels, but I think that you're probably healthcare is always run, or should always be run, on a triage basis. And that being the case, because there's only a limited amount of care.
Sure. It'll have to be rationed.
It does.
It has to be
so
rationed.
It's a logical outcome. Do I think it's going to happen? Yes. I think, am I overly opposed to it? No. If I were on my own to do it, I would probably be self-limiting as well. So I'm not overly opposed to it because it's the system that people are gravitating to. They're going to have to understand that it has consequences.
Right. We were talking a little earlier, you mentioned abortion, freedom of choice, that type of thing. Majority of doctors believe that human life does begin at conception. What does Bob Healey believe?
When those doctors want to have children, they should take that into consideration. I believe that the individual has the moral as well as the logical power to reason out what he or she should do. And mostly a she in this case, obviously. But my basic tenet is that if people are opposed to abortion, they should be out convincing people that they're right on their position, not necessarily blocking people. I guess my problem is you want to say, okay, we want the individual to be free to make all choices as an individual because only God is going to judge this person. And then they turn around and say, but in this area, we're going to tell you what to do.
Who makes choices for the unborn?
Well, that's the difficult question. That's between you and your maker.
You know, I mean,
and that's
the Supreme Court didn't grant that person in the womb personhood, but they are a human life.
It makes it hard.
What about?
But who am I to make a decision for another human being?
Well, you know, the Constitution says the freedom for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But you see, the Supreme Court said it wasn't necessarily a person. Right.
But how do you?
It is a human life.
I mean, I'm not really.
But I'm not going to debate that issue. What do you think about tax dollars for abortion?
Well,
our tax dollars being used for abortion.
From a pragmatic point of view, if you look at society in a cold hard reality, there's one way of looking at it, and there's a second one that your tax dollars being used for a procedure that someone as an individual should be doing that on their own anyway.
Yes.
So, I mean, I have a lot of those issues. If you're looking at, you talk about the death panels and the triages and all that kind of stuff, when you want to triage your entire society and you realize that probably the funding that you're going to put out as a society for what you're bringing into the world by not funding that, it really depends on whether you want to look at it from an economic point of view, which is probably not the worst idea. If you want to look at it from a moral point of view, then that's a whole different story. If you want to look at
morality enters into just about everything.
Well, we like to
the
think
law.
that it does.
Well, the law is basically based on common law, which is morality. We
It
legislate
is,
law.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing. Once we've given ourselves the opportunity to change the law to whatever we want it to be,
yeah. Well, here we go.
It doesn't necessarily follow the morality code.
Here we go.
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
right.
You know, you're moving from a common law system to a system where we elect people to make laws.
Sure, exactly.
So it's really popular will at that point in time.
You know, sticking to the subject of abortion, what do you truly think about the Roe v. Wade that was passed back in '73? Was a good law, in your opinion?
It gave the states the rights. You know, it kind of moved it into it took the states out of that picture in terms of giving them. I guess let me kind of move this into a picture here. Do I agree with it? I don't either agree or disagree. To me, as I said, those moral issues are not necessarily for government. I think they're more for, I mean, government's function, as far as I'm concerned, is really just to do the nuts and bolts that are assigned in the Constitution. You want to make moral judgments.
So you believe smaller government is better government?
Smaller government, constitutionally constricted government is very, very good as far as I think our founding fathers understood that.
Oh, yes.
I mean, Jefferson gave a quote, something like, I don't care if my neighbor has one God or 10 gods as long as my leg's not broken.
Right.
You know, I don't really care what you worship in terms of what you personally worship. It's more of as long as you're not imposing it on me. And I think that that's how we have to interpret the Constitution, not necessarily that it gives us some sort of moral high ground to either beat or not beat the other side.
Okay. Well, you know, talking about states' rights, I know you're very familiar with the Federalist Papers. You know, what do you feel states' rights actually should be? Should we adhere to the Federalist Papers? What's your opinion on that?
I think that the Constitution originally had clear-cut provisions in the 10th Amendment, and I really firmly believe that the 9th Amendment is one of the unused, where it gives the rights to the people. But the 10th Amendment concept, where the states have rights that weren't given to the federal government. We have a Constitution. The Constitution says, we, the states, give to the federal government X. And anything beyond X is not within the purview of the federal government.
Back to the states.
It goes back to the states, and if it's not in the states, it goes back to the people by the 9th Amendment. Well, what has happened is we had this 14th Amendment court type of concept where everything kind of becomes the states now are imposed with federal laws and federal mandates based on the Constitution.
Right.
The states additionally, excuse my language, but for lack of a better word, hoard themselves out to the federal government by accepting conditioned money for education, conditioned money for road building and transportation, conditioned money for
infrastructure of all kinds.
And they got suckered into the welfare concept by LBJ and a lot of that. So when you start looking at the states, do you really have any sympathy for states that have willfully given up their rights? Stupidly, I agree. But who willfully...
You truly are a libertarian.
Oh, yeah.
Truly.
No, there's no doubt about that.
Among all the founders of our great country, who do you have the most affinity for?
You know, I don't know whether I find one more compelling than another.
Okay.
But that's the thing. I find it fascinating that such a well-educated group of minds with capacity to see into the future could meet in one place. I mean, I find that just... it's like that's where lightning strikes for me. It's not necessarily that Madison was smarter than Washington and smarter than Jefferson. Or, you know, I don't have this, top 10 list or anything like that.
Give me your thoughts on what the Second Amendment means.
Second Amendment, to me, I've always argued, and I've long argued, and a lot of people find it objectionable maybe, but I always thought that the Second Amendment was there for the purpose of allowing people to have the opportunity to overthrow. I thought the Second Amendment always meant revolution. I think that by guaranteeing the people the rights to bear arms, you're guaranteeing them the rights to have the same position as their government. And when you have the same position as your government then is always susceptible to being overturned, which a lot of the patriots in the early times understood. If you don't like this government,
that's one of the best interpretations I've ever heard of the Second Amendment. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. You ran for governor, you ran for lieutenant governor. Why haven't you run for attorney general? I mean, you're an attorney.
Yeah, I just don't find the day-to-day functions of that office to be compelling to me. I find that it's nice and the state needs its representation, but I don't find the role overly stimulating. Whereas I think that the opportunity to make a major change in terms of the office of lieutenant governor or to when I ran for governor, I mean, I've always argued that in 1994, when I ran for governor, had I been elected, we would have been, I mean, you go back and you read those platforms and you read the documents from '94 election.
Sure.
And what I was proposing to do, the state would have, first of all, been outside of the box in terms of this economic situation. We would be prospering as a state.
Right.
The other thing was, at the time, I had the energy to do this. Now I'm an old man.
Yeah, you're a young man.
I'm an old man. I have to admit that the energy level, I mean, I think maybe I hope I still have some of the intellectual capacity. I don't know whether I have the vision anymore, and I don't know whether I have the stamina.
I have a son 2 years younger than you.
Okay.
2 years. Bob, we have to wrap this up right now. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, same here.
Folks, thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed Mr. Healey and the Cool Moose Party. Remember something. God has no hands on this earth but ours. Thanks for watching.